오늘 서울 비엔날레 도시전 리뷰전 행동하는 도시들 세미나를 시작하겠습니다.
We will now
안녕하세요.
begin
저희
the seminar
코로나
reviewing
사태와
the city's exhibition. Today, I'd like to thank the audience and the participants for coming despite the bad weather. My name is Chechunu, the curator of the city's exhibition. This seminar is about the city's exhibition. It is a review seminar and it is under the theme City as a Verb. We will have speakers make presentations as well as a round table discussion. Today we have two speakers from Seoul and Rotterdam, and we will look at their cases. I'd like to briefly introduce our distinguished guests. First, we have Ambassador Johan Dunwad from the Netherlands Embassy, and Lee Ha-jin, Cultural Affairs Officer. From the Swiss Embassy, we have Ambassador Linus von Castelmoer. We also have with us Mr. Kim Seung-hwae, the City Architect of Seoul, and Kim Tae-hyung, the Director of Urban Space Improvement Bureau. As the roundtable discussants, we have Kim Zukyung, the CEO of OUJAE Architects, Kim Young-jun, the CEO of YO2 Architects, Yoon Sung-hyung, professor from Chungang University, and Professor John Hong of Seoul National University, who is the general curator of this review exhibition. We also have Yoo So-gun from Seoul University and Kang Bom-chun, professor of Myungji University. We have with us from Amsterdam, Pak Kobonik, the chief urban designer of Amsterdam, who's joining us through Zoom, as well as the director of Het Nieuwe Instituut, Marina, Otero, Verzier, from Rotterdam. We also have Pak Keri, the Vice Representative of KCAP. Mr. Kim Zukyung from the OUJAE Architects will be making the first presentation.
Hello. I am going to talk about what the Seoul Metropolitan Government has done for the urban space planning, and when we target 2045, how we can predict the future and how we will transform and change the urban space in the city of Seoul based on the estimations we have for 2045. So the title of our project is the 2045 Seoul Urban Space Plan, and we would like the past and the future to coexist together in the image of Seoul. Seoul is a city that has a 500 history. It started under the Joseon dynasty, and it is also a modern city. And like Korea has developed and grown in the world, we need to reflect upon the city of Seoul. Seoul has a population of 10 million, and it is surrounded by nature in its topology. It is a very structured metropolis. And Molly Foundation surveyed the competitiveness of different cities, and Seoul ranked number 7. And compared to other global cities, Seoul is not lagging behind. And in this situation, we need to look at how Seoul can develop in the future. And in terms of our approach, we need to approach it not only in terms of hardware, but we need to think about the public good, and we need to think about the citizens' daily life and convenience for the citizens. There have been many different reports and plans and projects touching upon the city of Seoul. And Seoul has been developed following all of these different plans, but there has not been an integrated approach or a systematic approach in the urban development of Seoul until now. And when we look at the characteristics of our plan for the future, we looked at the future. We looked at the demographic structure of Seoul in the future, and we also looked at the different challenges of this urban space, which is Seoul in the future. Seoul will become warmer, older, more depressed, and we looked at the different threats and opportunities that Seoul will face. As for opportunities, we thought that Seoul would become more smart, and the biggest challenge would be climate change, demographic changes, and also the changes in technology will be the greatest change. And during the post-COVID-19 era, we look to see how the city should be transformed. When we look at the demographic changes in the future, in 2045, we think that the population will go down to 8 million, and we will see an increase in a single person and a two-person households. And we need to look at how housing in Seoul can respond to these demographic changes. And as you all know, we need to respond to climate change. And as temperature goes up in Seoul and Seoul becomes warmer, we need to look at how we can respond. And in terms of technology changes, we can innovate our different spaces. We will see the coming of a digital revolution with the advent of 5G, and with autonomous vehicles on the road, we will see a revolution in public transportation and transportation in general. During the post-COVID age, the untapped society will expand, and we will see village units and community level units within the city. We will see small pockets of villages and units being formed inside the city, and we need to be able to respond to these changes in structure. And so when we look at the future city, we need to look at the different elements of urban space. We have the natural topology, which is at the bottom, and then we have the buildings and structures which are built on the urban topology, and on top of that we have the urban infrastructure, which is the transportation routes and the different infrastructure within the city, and on top of that we have the social infrastructure, which is the community level SOCs and different types of public service facilities. Based on all of this, we need to have a vision and a scenario for each of the cases. Our 2045 urban space plan for Seoul is a physical 3D plan, and we would like to imagine a city of the future, an urban space in the future in 2045. And the first strategy that we can envision is to map out the different projects that we have carried out in Seoul until now. And last year, we carried out a village unit mapping, and we were able to map out on the map of Seoul the different projects that we carried out. And there are many good and outstanding projects that we have carried out, as you can see on this map. And these are like point level projects, projects that are connecting different neighborhoods, many different types of projects. And I analyzed and studied the different projects that Seoul carried out. The individual public facilities are of high quality, but if we look at their distribution on the map, they are not used well and they are not accessible. So that is why we need to change that. And we have many public spaces that have been created and that are managed, But these different spaces are not really well managed in their different sections. And we have Kium centers and different community center projects in the different neighborhoods. Yet, when we look at how they are distributed, they are not equally distributed, and it's still very disconnected. So most of the public facilities are isolated, the public spaces are fragmented and disconnected, and most of the community local level services and infrastructure are disconnected and insufficient. So we want to connect everything so that connection and rapport can be formed, and we would like to envision a constellation map, a constellation vision of the city of Seoul. So what we plan to do through our project is to find the star of Seoul, name it, and connect it so that we can reinterpret our urban landscape. And we need to look at the different issues, and based on the 4 things that I mentioned before, we looked at the different issues that each of the factors will face. First, for the natural topology, we need to reorganize our city so that we can respond to climate change. We need to find another settlement space to respond to the needs of the ages. And we need to find shared transportation so that we can reorganize the transportation structure and reorganize the community streets and pedestrian streets. And that is how we are focusing on our projects through our research. These are the questions that we have asked during the project, and you can read it in the detailed manual. And for the natural topology, as you can see on the left, we need to find a way for the city to connect, because right now the natural landscape, the city, and the water, they're all disconnected. And when we find a way to connect them, we will be able to respond to the climate change threats. And we need to look at the tributaries of the Han River and find a way to use them. And this is the diagram that shows us how we can do it, and we're using different simulations and modeling to see what we can do. And when we look at Seoul under 40 meters, we can draw many mountainous areas in Seoul. And when we connect the mountains to the tributaries and the water, there are many things that we can do. And we also have big landscapes and small unit landscapes, but we don't have any intermediate landscapes, and we need to create that, I think. And in the urban topology, we need to look at the buildings and the architectural structures that are in the city.
What should we do about old apartment buildings? We have several scenarios, single family and old families. Based on these scenarios, we will look at how we can possibly transform these aged apartment buildings. For the low-rise residential buildings, sometimes these buildings are old and we have to do a mapping in order to select the ones for our project. The third area, The third area is the urban infrastructure. We look at the transportation structure and the urban structure and its relationship. We look at the streets and how the streets are connected and how people move about in the cities. Look at the city structure that we have mapped in Seoul. There are several issues here, but in the end, these issues were a result of city sprawl. So we have to think about how we can address this issue so that it serves the lives of the citizens. We want to enhance the density of the subway stations. We want to make it a platform rather than a station where just people pass by. As a result of that, we can look at how the roads are connected and what shape of network the roads form. The fourth area is social infrastructure. It's at the scale of neighborhoods. The convenience facilities are there, but we need to look at how they work. A lot of these social infrastructure have now become multi-used, and we need to provide more and find out which areas are lacking these social infrastructure. School is a very valuable facility, and we are introducing the concept of school park, which means that the school ground will be open to the community. We are also looking at traditional markets and upgrading them so that they are aligned with the modern consumption pattern. In the villages and neighborhoods, there are children and the elderly as well as the youths who are not productive, who are not part of the labor force. We are looking at many different ways to serve these population. Based on such future strategies, we looked at different items and applied the different scenarios. These are commercial areas. When we make this into a service platform, there are several different scenarios that we can think about. And many of these facilities will change so that they can support the new normal. Several other facilities will be redistributed so that there are no vacuums or voids where services are lacking. Empty parking spaces should be utilized as well. And the lower floors of the apartment buildings can transform into community space. In the commercial space, there will be surplus parking space. These space could be utilized as space for logistics and could transform to take on additional functions. The arterial roads will also be affected as we move toward shared mobility. When this happens, how will the appearance of these main artery roads change as well? Many of the urban structures will go underground, and then what will happen above ground? When there are a lot of vacancies occurring in the apartment buildings, we have to look at how we are going to address this issue. When we connect the parks, what will happen? What will be the new programs? What will happen to the waterfront spaces? And how can we integrate the natural surroundings of the cities with the city fabric? Based on these strategies, our team looked at the various scenarios and did a simulation on the 20 candidate sites. The simulation is now taking place, but it is based on the future strategy that we talked about earlier, as well as the different scenarios. We are going to proceed with the simulation based on the input from other architects as well. These are the various points of the projects, and we hope that the projects will form a new constellation. With that, I conclude my presentation.
Thank you for that presentation. You showed us a clear plan for 2045. I was especially interested in your message that we would be only working 3 days a week in the future. I'd like to introduce Marina, Otero, Verzier, and Professor John Hong will be introducing her.
Privileged to have Maria Otero Verzier joining us. Marina Otero is an architect and the director of research at the Het Nieuwe Instituut, the new institute in Rotterdam. She was the curator of work, body, leisure, the Dutch pavilion at the 16th Venice Architecture Biennale in 2018. She was also chief curator of the 2016 Oslo Architecture Triennale, together with After Belonging Agency, and the director of the Global Network Programming at Studio X Columbia University in New York. Marina is also co-editor of Unmanned, Architecture and Security series, published in 2016, After Belonging, the objects, spaces, and territories of the ways we stay in transit, and also Architecture of Appropriation, and these three publications, but much more. She's the editor of Work, Body, Leisure, and from September 2022, Marina will be the head of the Social Design Masters at the Design Academy of Eindhoven. Thanks so much for joining us from afar, and sorry to pull you away from vacation, but we're so privileged to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well,
It's a privilege to...
Oh, go ahead. There's a delay. There's a delay. So we'll have to get used to it. This is the new era of communication.
I know. Maybe I'm too far away. I'm in Galicia, that was once deemed as the end of the world, Finisterre. So I understand the delay.
Oh, good.
But just want to say thank you for inviting me to be here today, and it's a pleasure to share ideas about the new institute and what we are doing there with all of you.
Great, thank you.
Should I start?
Oh, yes, please.
Okay. So today I would like to talk about the work that we have been doing at the new institute in the last years. The institute was created in 2013 and is an institution that has comes together like the architecture, design, and digital culture. One of the key elements of the institute is innovation in these three fields. But what we thought that since the beginning is that innovation is not possible without conflict. So especially we see the development of new technologies and new ideas about society. Those don't come without certain forms of conflict. So all our programming and our understanding of what an institution is somehow organized around these two notions. So this is the new institute. It's located in Rotterdam, and what the institute has to do is connect not only the local culture and the national culture, but also an international presence of Dutch architecture and design and digital culture. So also these three levels have different needs and at the same time are connected to each other. We always try to understand how the Institute has to respond to those different scales and forms of operation. One of the key elements for us is the idea of exhibition. Indeed, we have different parts in the Institute. It's a quite unique institution because it's not only a museum, has also a very big archive. It's the archive of Dutch architecture and urban planning, but also we have connection with policymaking through the agency and international collaborations. At the same time, we have a research department. So all these elements sometimes come together in a form of exhibition making, but we don't understand exhibitions necessarily as a neutral vehicle of dissemination of ideas, or even as a finished product, a form of display of ideas, but rather as a space for research and a critical model. So many times the exhibitions that we present look unfinished, because indeed exhibitions don't start when the research is finished and objects are for being on display, but rather are spaces for discussion, for meeting, for creating an audience. And many times are spaces that are in transformation over time. So what you find when you arrive the first day is not the same that is on display when you come back. And there is always display between the front and the back side of the exhibition. So we are always showing things that other museums might not show. That is the back end of what happens in an institution. This is a beautiful exhibition of period rooms that was designed by architects Andreas Angelidakis. And indeed, the exhibition was a place where the construction of the exhibition happened over time and through the eyes also of the architect and the people who were visiting the space. And many times, as I said, we also show the processes by which exhibitions are made. And we are not scared about like showing to the audience how an institution operates. For us, it's also very important not to think about our visitors as consumers, but rather what is their task or what is their form of engagement when they come. So we also look for a very active engagement and participation of the people who comes into the museum. They are not only passive viewers, but rather we ask them to also be aware of their bodies and their identities and how they can be transformed or questioned when they enter the space of the exhibition. But also very important, in addition to this public emphasis on exhibitions as a critical space, is our task to investigate the new roles of the designer and the new roles of the institute. We believe that we are in a moment in which institutions have to be redefined. There are many challenges. Many of them were presented in the previous talk about climate change, but also forms of identity, questions of race, questions of gender that are extremely important for society and forms of organization. And those things those questions are challenging the more traditional structures of the institutions. So for us, what is important is that the Institute keeps on being a very dynamic place that is able to respond to the societal questions that arise. And that means also in relation to the disciplines of design, architecture, and digital culture, that this profession, these disciplines also have to have a renewed form of engagement with society. And these two things, on the one hand, inwards, looking in how we have to be transformed as an institution, and outwards, looking how the disciplines that we are representing and the professions they are dealing with are also transformed and adapted to the new challenges. In that sense, there is a renewed attention to research, like in the form of like architects and designers, artists are very much interested also in processes, not only final products, and how these processes are connected to different forms, material forms, environmental questions, etc., and how the processes by which even objects are made or architectural made are connected to forms of industrialization, forms of exploitation, of questions of labor, or questions of climate and environment. We are also interested in questions of security, how many times architects, designers, digital artists are connected to technologies that questions notions about privacy, what is privacy, what is private and what is public, and how we should engage with those questions through design, because these questions are extremely complicated and big, so we cannot attempt as an institute to tackle them in all its facets, but especially from the point of view of design. And that leads us also to, the material consequences of the work we do. And for many years, we have thinking through materials as well. And what is the implication of using certain materials in the architecture and design? In this case, this was an exhibition about wood and what were the processes through which wood was, questions of deforestation, questions of labor, indigenous cultures that were affected by the use of wood in the industry. Unlike many museums, we are not necessarily interested in showing or highlighting the author nor the original. Many museums for a long time have been very worried about the value of the original pieces that they show. But in our case, that's not the core of what we are trying to do. Rather, we are interested also in forms of replica and copies. And that means that forms of that go from the digital ideas about copyleft or Creative Commons to questions about forms of fabrication like 3D printing that allow to replicate an object many times. Similarly, we want to dismantle a little bit the idea that there is a single author, for instance, a single architect that is the main author of one piece of architecture or piece of design, but rather that design, architecture, and research are very much collaborative practices. So we tend to highlight those collaborative practices instead of the single figure of an architect or a designer. This is some of the ways in which we have tackled that. For instance, this exhibition again was about wood. We were thinking about the relation between certain unique pieces of collections in relations to forms of production, like in this case, is like IKEA furniture, and what are the impacts that they have in society, these different understandings of value in relation to design, and where actually we place value in design and in relation to society and in different aspects. And these are notions about, how to tackle fabrication from another point of view that are more emerging through other technologies. I'm particularly the director of research at the Institute, and my task when I left New York to move to Rotterdam was to imagine what research could be in the context of the museum. And for me, it was also a challenge because I was coming from more the background of working in a university. But in a museum, the forms of understanding research are different. And it's informed by many of the questions that I explained before. For instance, this idea that perhaps in the university setting, the question of the authorship and uniqueness of the research is extremely important. But when you come to the context of a museum, the research in which I'm interested to pursue is something that is collective, and in many ways is something that we like to do internal and external, involving many parties together. And that immediately challenges the idea that who owns forms of research, who owns ideas, and how a museum or an institution serves to disseminate them and make them public. For me, the most important part is how to bring the most innovative ideas to the outside, to the audience, to the administrations, to the professionals, and that to challenge traditional form and bring possibly change in different directions. And the first time they asked me what then is research, I said that it was time. It's also a form of exploration, and it's a way of rethinking preconceived ideas that we have and have the time and the space to contest them and look at them in a renewed way. So what is a museum and what it could be? It was somehow the first notion. In order to do research in a museum, first of all, we also have to challenge what a museum is or might be. So we did a series of what we call reading rooms, in which we were bringing people to reflect on very basic topics, like will be money or could be security, could be housing, could be museum, things that we think we know, but actually we go deeper into them, we realize that we don't know as much as we think we know. So things that are pervasive or are extremely banal, and then we don't put attention to them, but actually in looking at them is where things can also be innovative, less by tricking certain aspects. And that's somehow you will see the way in which I generally work, looking at things that seem too normal to put attention to them. This was a beautiful conversation between Chus Martinez and Beatrix Ruff about the museum, and Chus Martinez imagined the museum as an octopus that have different legs and tentacles, and the brain is not centralized only in the managerial team or like the main actors of the museum, but rather is an intelligence that is collective and spreads over beyond the limits of the white cube. So here you see how the octopus spreads through the city. So the museum is not any longer a confined space, a protective space, but it's rather something that is embodied and is, expanding through the city and bringing different voices in a multivocal trajectory that brings better, more diverse understanding of what culture is, that is able to bring as many different voices as possible, not only the more privileged ones. We also organize a fellowship program, and what we do is we give fellowships for 6 months. Generally has been for individuals, 6 months in which they can do whatever they want. We are not expecting any outcome. We were proposing certain topics, and in the last years, this topic has been borne out. Was thinking about how our way of working is not only affecting our health, affecting the way in which we relate to the world, but also how our way of working is also have a big impact on the planet in the way that we are exhausting our bodies, but we are also exhausting the body of the planet. So what other more sustainable ways we should implement in our understanding of work, and to be able to have a more generous way of thinking about us and the planet. In that sense, I like the idea of working only 3 days a week, as you were proposing in the previous conversation. But we always, after the call for fellows, we do a report or research about the applications we receive in order to change the conditions for the next edition. Something that is very important for us is we don't ask for letters of recommendation. We don't ask for a CV. We are not interested in what is the trajectory of the applicants. We are interested in the ideas they have and what is the methodologies they want to use. And we put emphasis on that, on the methodologies and how innovative these methodologies could be to create new knowledge. So you can see this is the first edition. We got different responses from different parts of the world, and we realized that there were certain areas that were not present. So we actively try to find ways in which we could be more open, and like our call for fellows, our ideas, or these opportunities were available for more people all over the world. This was the different number of applicants. At the beginning was very much Netherlands based, which is logic as we are based in the Netherlands. But this is also an opportunity for us to bring researchers from any other part of the world and learn from them as well. So we want to be as wide as possible. This is also a condition that we are not interested on a particular age for applicants. We think research could be something that is done by many other people. So we were happy to see that we're more mature researchers who are also applying, and that is also, we don't put an age limit to the applications as many other institutions do. These are the type of people who applied, like architects, designers, artists, and what they were interested. And you see, well, technology, material culture, etc., they were quite present. So we were analyzing all this information. And then what were the keywords that they were used? So research, new, or art, architecture. Some of them are quite interesting because you could see revolution was one of the keywords that were used in the applications. There's also the periods in which people is interested in doing research. And obviously we are very much towards the contemporary, also because the type of work we do at the Institute. And this is just for fun, perhaps, but to understand what were like the typography that most of the applicants were using. And you see Helvetica is the preferred font by architects and designers, surprisingly. So we will see like how we are operating most of the times in the same field and context of references of how we can change or challenge that as well. And I was talking about this notion of burnout and this idea how we work together, how we work and exploit the planet in order to produce more and more. And those ideas also came in the pavilion for Venice that I curated in the last edition of Venice Biennial, and it was called Work, Body, Leisure. For me, it was a privilege to be able to curate the Dutch pavilion in Venice because it's an honor, but especially as I'm not a Dutch national, I'm a Dutch resident and I studied there and I worked there, and I am very happy to be working in the Netherlands and living there, but I'm from Spain. So also I found like the responsibility also how to represent best the Netherlands and the values that I think the country can offer in relation to these notions. And at the same time, what it means these days to make a national representation, who is actually present when we represent a country and how is not actually represented there. So these questions were very much indeed thought through the process of the pavilion. And it's also one of the main tasks we have as an institute, how to represent Dutch culture abroad. And it's something that, you know, we have to deal with questions of nationalism, but also questions of how to represent the variety of voices that the Netherlands has, the variety of bodies and points of view. So there is not always just one unique understanding of the country. So this was what you will find when you will enter in the Dutch pavilion, an orange room made out of lockers. And it was interesting. I remember that I took my sister with me because I was proud to be in the Venice, and I asked her if she can come with me to visit the pavilion. And I took her here, and she said like, so we are leaving our staff here and then we go to the Dutch pavilion. And I was like, no, this is actually the Dutch pavilion. So I think that was something that some people experience. They will face this endless locker room and they wouldn't know what was about. But it was a place that will unfold itself. So behind these lockers, there were many different other worlds that were unfolding. Some of them were only research material that was hidden in the lockers, but others were actually rooms that were behind. For me, what was interesting about this locker room, it was to represent the Netherlands in a way. It's a very controlled a man-made landscape that is rational, that is Cartesian, that is organized, that is efficient, and that has the idea of labor ingrained in its history since the beginning. So it's a land that has been designed. So as an architect and a designer, understanding that an entire country has been designed is something really interesting. At the same time, I wanted to look into the mechanisms by which this land was designed and how. And this idea of equality. The Netherlands also praised itself as a land where, you know, there's a equality is one of the rights and the questions that makes the country proud. So this idea of like this collectivity that is made of individuals, like these kind of lockers, that they have equal opportunities, but at the same time behind them, there is also very specific conditions and very different stories. So this is one of the thoughts that were not explained. I'm just sharing with you to understand the process now. And each of these rooms, we're talking about different stories of work and leisure and the bodies who are affected by them. So one of them is Constant, the artist, one of a major figure in Dutch history, but in general also has been a source of inspiration for many architects, designers, and artists. Constant imagined New Babylon, that was a place, a city that was only for play. No one was working, and it was possible because all the processes were automated. So because every process was automated, the inhabitants of New Babylon could dedicate their time just to play. So it was an ever-changing environment that was, each person will become a designer because you could design your own space. Extremely sophisticated notion that happened in the 50s and 60s. And now we are in a moment that it could actually become true. But what happened is that Constant was looking at this project for decades, and his enthusiasm at the beginning very quickly transformed in something different, because he understood that bringing this innovation, this idea of like eradicating labor or liberating human bodies from labor, wouldn't necessarily eradicate violence, that in certain ways human society is connected to forms of violence. So his otherwise very optimistic approach to the city soon became a space of conflict, and his drawings started to be populated by scenes of crime or murder or protests, demonstrations, etc. So for me, that was a lesson to understand how much certain forms of innovation and technology could actually bring, new ideas about society, but at the same time, forms of conflict. And Constant was a thread that was connecting these other ideas on other works. This room was conceived by Mark Wigley, and he was looking into, these different tensions that were inherited to the work of Constant. And this is not an original painting by Constant. Actually, it's a reproduction made by a robot, which was quite accurate and very well done. Talking about labor and the transformation of the land and bodies, it was inevitable to talk about a question that is also very present today all over the world, but also in the Netherlands, that is the history connected to slavery. So Amalala talked about the doors of no return, these doors that were in the African continent and from where many people, bodies were captured and taken to the New World as slaves. And obviously, European nations have been benefiting from this forced labor for centuries. And a lot of the wealth that we have is connected to these forms of labor that also allowed for industrialization and accumulation of wealth that actually created the cities where we live now. So this was a reflection about, on the one hand, thinking about Constant and this city where many people is free to play, but there are other bodies, in this case automated machines, that were needed to sustain that system by performing the work. And obviously we are talking about machines, but we have to remember that in the past, many bodies, human bodies, were not understood to be human. And so we were always bringing questions of history and understanding of what we mean by bodies that are human or not human, and how we exploit them in order to gain and transform the environment, whether they are animals or plants or humans or machines. I'm not going to go into detail, but these are some of, for instance, some of the factories, European factories where enslaved bodies were used to do forced labor. And the Dutch were part of that. So we were also acknowledging these questions of labor. And as I say, it's a question that through the protest of Black Lives Matter, but also the thought how institutions in the Netherlands, museums and any other gardens or like custodians of history have to position themselves in relation to these stories and these forms of inequality. Changing like to another room within the pavilion, we were talking about automation. Automation in present day in the Netherlands, which is a big industry. The Netherlands is one of the places where forms of automation are more present, either like in the port of Rotterdam, that are one of the terminals is completely automated, or in places like dairy farms or greenhouses. So we are very interested in what is this relation between architecture, automated bodies, and different other bodies, like whether humans or plants or animals. And this was thought through the control room of the port of Rotterdam, from where now humans are constrained to that space because the other spaces are the spaces of the machines. And I will talk a bit more about it later, so I won't go deep into this now. But this is like one of the landscapes of the Netherlands, where you can see this sea of greenhouses that most of them are now tending towards automation. And one of the reasons we were interested as an institute to look at this, it was, okay, what type of city, what type of landscapes are created through these typologies of architecture, and how we should think about the relation between, these forms of production, these forms of technology, and the traditional city, and how these two things can perhaps come together, especially because there are questions like energy consumption that are very much also to consider when we plan this type of spaces. And you can see how in many ways in the Netherlands, you have seen the transformation from a more traditional space of farming, perhaps, and the new ways in which these are kind of endless surfaces of enclosed spaces where tomatoes and flowers are growing 24/7 during the entire year, regardless of the climate conditions outside. And at the same time allow for having a supply that will be reaching all the population of the Netherlands and will be also be exported. But this is for, as an architect, as a designer, urbanist, we're interested in what type of space this type of production creates. This is a dairy farm also in the Netherlands where cows are taken care of by robots. And you see the entanglement, the relation between these two beings and how they are working in a seemingly symbiotic way. In many ways, there are very interesting forms of relation between the cows and the robots that are there to serve them, but also to control them. You see the color that the cow has, obviously is measuring the temperature, the number of times by which this cow has been eating or has been moving, and that allows also the farmer to have a different relation with the space, the animals, that before. Now it's more like a control room where you can see animals or these animals through database. So in a way, animals are transforming data, which is also a kind of transformed relation with the beings that we are surrounded with. And the pavilion where, as you can see, we shift from different bodies, like what is the relation between technology and cities, technology and forms of labor that were also enslaved bodies, forms of relation between technology and plants and animals, and also we wanted to bring the question of gender. Obviously, there are always a gender gap when we talk about labor. And this is the manual, the Neufert. It's a very well-known manual used by architects. And you can see how domestic labor is always portrayed, in this case, I mean, these editions that are the editions we have in the archive, with a female body. So there are certain bodies that are supposed to perform certain labor, and we have just taken it for granted. Many generations of architects have been designing spaces according to manuals like this. So we also wanted to think through those sides and what it means, and how questions of gender could be part of the Institute, inside, as I say, looking inwards and looking outwards, and especially in a profession like design and architecture, where there are many female designers, but at the same time, the profession or the success of many professionals doesn't reflect that much this the female professionals that are involved in these activities. And I bring that too because many times technology has been seen as a liberating agent. So we thought that when technology will also bring to the domestic space of the house, will serve to liberate us from certain tasks. But what we have learned is that many times what has happened is that technology has reinforced certain bias, certain notions about gender or forms of diversity that were present. So not always technological developments are liberating. In many cases are confirming or reinforcing certain stereotypes and certain forms of exploitation or exclusion. So we also have to be aware of those conditions. This is a sex robot factory. I bring that because we were also talking about the relation between the Netherlands and the red light district in Amsterdam. And, you know, the Netherlands has been always praising itself because of being an open culture and what it means to allow, for instance, sex work and regulate it. And there were many reports that were saying that soon this type of sex work will be performed by robots. So we were interested in understanding what that will mean. And we saw how many times the technology is also that reinforcing certain ideas about the female body and what is the relation between different genders. So we were working also with technologies that works with connected to ethics and technology to understand how certain developments affect not only the city, whether it is like self-driving cars, but also forms of diversity, gender gaps, and so on, how the engineers that are now designing technologies are also inserting their own bias in designs that then will affect the development of society. There were also very joyful moments in the pavilion, so not everything was could be considered as a more like science fiction catastrophes. But there was this space designed by Beatriz Colomina that was about how the bed has become a space for labor. And I think now that we have been, many people around the world have been confined in their places, how the domestic space has become a place of labor. And that was one of the notions that Colomina was exploring through the performance that Yoko Ono and John Lennon did in many places, but also in Amsterdam in the 60s, when they did the bed in. And what she was saying is that they were protesting the war and they were protesting the way in which society operates, also labor conditions, the way in which we self-exploit ourselves. And they decided to invite journalists that they stay in bed for days and invite journalists to give interviews or talk about these questions. But by doing that, they were transforming the bed in an office space as well, in a working space. So she was interested in this notion that nowadays has become so pervasive. There are many studies saying that many professionals actually work from bed a large number of hours. And now that we have been transforming forcefully our spaces, domestic spaces in office spaces, and working through Zoom or any other technology, this has become even more true. So what we did is replicating this room, hotel room where Yoko Ono and John Lennon stayed in Amsterdam. And then Beatrice invited many different architects and figures in the art to talk about this transformation of understanding of labor in relation to the domestic space and the transformation of the notion of office space as well. So it was a marathon in which everyone was wearing pajamas. It was kind of a very, very fun day. And this is also one of the rooms designed by Simon Nikhil, in which we were talking about questions about perspective, 3D technology, and forms of replication, how the 3D world and the ways in which we design in the cyberspace, on the space, virtual space, are more and more defining the way in which we live our spaces. But there was also this question that I talked about at the beginning, that was the relation between being what it means to represent a country in the context of a biennial. And we believe that we wanted to have forms of solidarity also between different pavilions. So we organized a project together with our neighbors in the Giardini, that were Spain and Belgium. And we decided that the day of the opening, none of the pavilions will have their name of the country displayed in the facade, but rather all of them, and this was the outcome of a call for projects we did, all the pavilions will be called Europe. And obviously Europe is not a space that is unproblematic, but was this idea of a place of free circulation of people, solidarity, and that notion that Europe embodies and not always, keeps or honors as it should. But that was the main idea, also to challenge this constrained idea about the nation, and rather look for ways in which how we can collaborate together with other territories, with other designers, with other people, with other spaces. So yeah, everyone relinquished their names for a day to be able to represent a larger aim. And one of the questions that is important for us is history, but also the present and relation between present and history. And as I said, we have a very important archive that has architecture from the Netherlands. But when we look closer at the archive, we also realized that more than 90% of the documents we have are owned or come from male architects. So for us, white male architects. So for us, that was something that we knew that we have to look through. I understand what it means to have an archive that only represents a very small percentage of the population. And we started to do a series of archive projects. And now our aim is to bring new ideas and new policies to the archive, so it's able to represent the notions and the bodies that are actually transforming the country and its landscapes, not only just a few ones. So in that sense, as I said, we were also interested in forms of collections that are not about valuable pieces and originals, but rather what it means to collect, what it means to create an archive. This looks like miniatures, but I have to say that it's huge. This is the main lobby of the Institute. So it was this collection of, we asked people to bring objects that they had been collecting in a more amateur way for years, and this was the result of it. But yeah, this is the traditional archive, and as I said, there are certain voices and certain practices that have more presence in this archive. So we try to challenge that. Through different activities. And also look at forms in which cultural production is being made today and how we should actually acquire or make an archive of digital culture. Many times that is ephemeral forms of culture. This was an exhibition of screen spaces. It was screensavers. That was an art form that now is not needed anymore. So we are interested in these also forms of digital work that are somehow disintegrating or disappearing. And forms of collecting that are more connected to our daily practices. We are all the time sharing, archiving, accumulating information and images. So this also makes us rethink what actually an archive or a collection should be. So we, as I said, we did a series of explorations that are among them feminism in the architecture, trying to say, okay, why 90% of the materials we have in the archive are authored by male architects? What about women? Are they present in the collection? How we should bring them to the fore? Or what type of new policies we should establish in order to acquire material by female architects? We also think through querying the collection, so and also questions about squatting that I will talk very briefly. But obviously, we are also thinking about the colonial past of the Netherlands and how to bring those notions also into the archive to have this legacy presence and reflect upon it through public conversations. I apologize because I'm gonna go very quickly through this because we don't have time. But this is a project we did about squatting, and it was already presented in South Korea before last year. And the main idea was to acknowledge actors that are key in transforming cities through architecture, but they might not have a degree in architecture. So it was a way of two main goals. On the one hand, acknowledging those actors that are fundamental for the transformation of cities, that are perhaps not professional, and on the other, to tackle the question of housing that obviously in the Netherlands, but many other places in the world, should be a right. But right now, many people have a lot of difficulties to access a house because of the market-oriented policies that cities have taken. So for us, this was a twofold goal to have a conversation about these issues. And we selected squatting because until very recently, in 2010, squatting was actually not criminalized in the Netherlands. It was tolerated, and it was only after 2010 when squatting was banned. And for us, was like, how come it was possible before to have this idea about the rights of housing, and that maybe now is not present, and what has changed in our conception of housing and cities to make that change possible. So we recover the history of squatting and how many times these movements allow for preserving very important monuments that were endangered by forms of real estate or city transformation. So by occupying and saving them, they made them possible to exist today. But also, we were interested in how squatters were bringing out different notions of domesticity, like collective forms of living that now are even, part of the market. So this kind of co-working or co-housing, but in that moment were very radical notions about how to live together under other conditions that might not be the nuclear family. So we were really interested on that too. This was the law by which in 2010 squatting was banned, but still there are some spaces that exist. And what we did is documenting these spaces and bringing them to the archive in order to also give them value to these forms of architecture production that are not normative, that are not done by professional architects, but still are fundamental for the ecosystem of the city, for allowing different forms of living together and different forms of existence within the city. And I think I'm reaching my limit, so I just will go through some images very quickly. These are some interiors, and what we did is also to produce drawings, annotated drawings, that combine architectural documentation with the oral histories that the inhabitants of these spaces brought. So in a way, are archival oral histories of archival memories of the inhabitants. Many of these spaces have disappeared during the course of their research. And unfortunately, there are less and less spaces that stay. Many of them, though, have been able to transform, and now they are cultural spaces in the city. In many cases, like this one that you will see now, squatters have collaborated with asylum seekers and refugees in order to have accommodation. And the project finished with this book that is available online, and it could be totally in PDF. Everyone can access it. And also with the acquisition of these materials in the National Archive. So right now, squatters are part of the official history of Dutch architecture. Many ways we as an institute, and with this I think I will finish, we were interested in this conflict and innovation. In a way, comes here very, very evidently, because we are an institution that is funded primarily by the government, and obviously we have a responsibility towards that. And by doing this project, we were in a way in a conflictual situation in which the same government who decided to ban squatting is the same government that is funding us, and the institute is supporting squatters by acknowledging their value. So, but we think that is important, and so far we have been always this type of forms of engagement with culture had been very well allowed by the government. I think that's something that I have experienced in the Netherlands that I have not experienced in many other places, that the possibility of doing even more activist work within institutions, even if they are funded by the government. And to me, that's something that that's one of the reasons why I work in the Netherlands, because I'm able to do things that are, innovative, that could be controversial still, and they are able to be developed in the country. Of course, there was this tension between an institution that is funded by the government is actually promoting a practice that is criminalized by the government. But there are many ways in which we try to challenge those questions and bring them to create a public conversation. For us, the most important is how the Institute can become a forum for discussing important questions, whether related to technology, related to climate change, related to housing, and how we can be this voice that allows for a conversation and possibly maybe policy changes as well. So that's it. Thank you so much for having me today and allowing me to share all these experiences.
Great, thank you.
네, HNI의 다양한 활동 영역을 보여주신
Thank you for introducing the different activities and programs of HNI, and I hope to see you next year at our Urban Architecture Biennale. And next, we would like to see a video about Sejongno 7017. Seoul Law 7017 was launched to give back to pedestrians space that had been used as an overpass and has become a famous site with more than 16 million visitors. Seoul Law 7017 architect MVRDV Winnie Mas proposed urban regeneration with the creation of a pedestrian city network. To do this, as the first step, we are connecting Seoul Law with the adjacent buildings. Hotel Manu and Daewoo Building are already connected. Metro Building and Lotte Mart will be connected soon, together with 4 other buildings in the northern part around the Seoul Station area. This will connect Seoul Law with 8 buildings, creating a new 3D pedestrian network. Areas around Seoul Law have already been regenerated or will be completed soon. The development of Jungnimlo Pedestrian Culture Street has created a commercial district and a pleasant pedestrian space. 10 facilities have been constructed or renovated to develop neighborhood businesses and to promote urban regeneration through cooking, to be used as a core facility for local revitalization. Symbolic spaces like Songgyejeong Park will be renovated, giving more parking spaces to Seogye-dong. Package house renovation program and the building of autonomous houses will enhance the quality of life of citizens. We can go there with our family and enjoy a snack under the trees, which is great. The trees and lighting are very well designed. I hope Seoul Law 7017 can be expanded so more people can benefit. I would like to see more citizen participation so we can create something together. I hope this will not just stop here, but I hope we can connect with the neighborhood on a deeper level so that we can enjoy the walk until we arrive at our destination. Seoul Law is currently being used by citizens in their daily life and tourists, but we will need more connections to the nearby areas. The second phase of the project is to connect Seoul Law to other areas. If we look at the urban situation around Seoul Law, we have many pedestrian alleys that are blocked by cars, roads disconnected with buildings. There is a need to revitalize commercial districts and many underused urban assets. And we need to connect Seoul Law to other living areas. That is why the alley architects of Seoul Law have set up 3 goals to attract visitors, revitalize, and regenerate with the citizens, residents, and neighbors to resolve all of the mentioned challenges. Through the creation of a green network for pedestrians and by improving the local environment, and the revitalization of local hubs, our goal is to improve the areas around Seoul Law. With 3 major assets, Seoul Law will branch out in 7 directions. Seoul Law Master Plan was developed based on the proposal from Winnie Mas and the proposal of the 7 alleys given by the alley architects. 중림 1길, 중림 2길, 서계 1길, 서계 2길, 후암 1길, 후암 2길, 회연길. Located on the western side of Seoul Station, Seogye Il-gil is a densely populated area with low-rise buildings with a lot of potential to flourish through a targeted plan. Located in a hilly area, Seogye Il-gil has great views but lacks infrastructure with many low-rise buildings. We would like to create green alleys that are fun to discover. Yakhyeon Cathedral, St. Joseph Commercial District, apartments, Jungnim Fish Market are all located in Jungnim Il-gil, a culturally rich area with a strong local identity. We must retrieve the memories and character of the neighborhood to reconnect them again. Songgyejeong Park and the Chungcheong Green Space are located in Jungnim Il-gil. Visitors of Seoul Law will be able to discover greenery and a green park once this area is connected with Seoul Law. To the east of Seoul Law, there is a fishnet alley connecting the city with Namsan. Roads that have become parking lots, blocked pedestrian roads, tunnels that have been disconnected. We want to change all that. Huam Il-gil starts in the middle of Seoul Law and goes up to Yongsan Park. And through the connection with Huam Il-gil leads you to Namsan Park. By using the historical potential of the sites, we want to create a pedestrian road for the citizens. Huamigil will connect Seoul's green area with Namsan Park. The regeneration of alleys connected with Seoul will revitalize communities. Seoul 7017 will be connected with 7 roads. The 7 alley architects have 3 goals: creating more green networks for pedestrians, improving local environment, and revitalizing hubs. To do this, 229 projects were identified and will be executed by 3 alley studios located in Seoge, Jungnim, and Haeyeon Huam. Alley architects will work with residents on all of the projects. When each service is contracted individually, residents are unable to participate in the process, and the overall design is not well integrated. Through total design, we hope to develop a consistent design for the residents. They will be able to participate in the project selection through the alley studios, and a committee composed of residents, CRC, and alley architects will be able to all work together. Projects identified by the studio will be connected through a consortium composed of a designer, a builder, and branding graphic designers. The alley architects then will explain and coordinate the master plan before it is executed. Around Seoul, we have Namsan, Yongsan Park, Songgyejeong Park, and many green sites. All 7 alleys are connected to these green spaces, reinforcing pedestrian walking. We also discovered promising hidden spaces, which we will transform into hub spaces that residents will be able to use. These spaces will become hubs for local culture for the communities. Buildings around Seoul are very old and are managed individually. By improving the alley environment and design, the 7 alleys connected to Seoul will offer a consistent urban landscape and quality streets inside the city. Our goal is to reinforce pedestrian space, revitalize hubs as a destination, and improve the local environment. 4 projects were launched in 2019 and 2020. 10 projects will be executed, and these projects will be expanded into many different projects in the future. The 229 projects will be the seed that will be planted in the alley studios and grow into a Seoul 7017 forest.
Next, there will be a presentation by Mr. Kim Tae-young, the Director General of USIB. The title is Yes or Yes Urbanism.
Could you put up my presentation, please? I am working at the Urban Space Improvement Bureau at the Seoul Metropolitan Government. And we listened to the HNI project presentations, but like HNI in Seoul, we operate exhibition space, and we have many ambassadors with us here today. We are in charge of the Architectural Biennale next year. But our main role, as you have just seen on the video, is to plan and execute many of the main projects in Seoul. And this is the title of my presentation. I would like to introduce some of the major projects in Seoul. And since we need to introduce many of the urban projects of the different cities, I would like to do that for Seoul. And this is my title, Yes or Yes Urbanism. Yes usually has a positive connotation, but when I put a question mark after the second yes, then it can be controversial and some people may not be sure. That was what I wanted to reflect. And yes is not always positive in the Korean context. When somebody asks a question, according to the question, the yes can be an opposition to the question that was raised. And when we say yes, usually we could say yes or no, but I put yes or yes, meaning we have no choice, we have to create a new type of city, and that we have no choice. This is what Seoul looks like. As you all know, it's a very dynamic city, and this image was created in a very compressed way, and we grew like this in a very short period of time. Beginning, we were the capital of Korea since the 14th century, and we went through the Korean War in the 1950s, and we grew from ruins, and investment in infrastructure happened in a record period of time. And we need to be ready for the future. We need to be ready for changes. And when we look at the statistics, Seoul is very, very dense. And this is what Seoul looks like. In black, we have the developed part of Seoul. But if we look at the total surface and area of Seoul, it's only 35% of Seoul, the area that has been developed. The remaining part that is white are mountains, waters, or parks, and are the basic infrastructure that supports the city, which is 65%. And we have the potential to develop these areas for different types of usages. And that is why I put up the title, Another Seoul. This area, which is 65.45%, it's distributed equally around the developed part of Seoul. And for several years, we have been wondering how to develop this part of Seoul. Beginning 2017, with the title Superground, we invited many famous architects around the world, and we selected 18 different sites so that we could carry out research on how they could be used in a different way. For example, Topotech worked on the number 2 subway line, and if it comes up on the surface, how are we going to use this space? We can use this as an urban gallery. And Studio Fuksas has proposed to transform the roads near the waterfront into different types of spaces that people can use. And amongst the 65.5% of the area that we can use, there is a lot of water areas, and maybe we can build a new city on the waterfront based on that. And we also have a lot of bridges that were used by cars before, but we would like to change them into parks. And for 2 years, through the Superground project, we carried out a lot of research, and it has come out in a book. And we have carried out another research on how to use the different infrastructure in Seoul, and the title of that book is Another Seoul. Buckminster Fuller said the following: you can never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, we need to build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. And so we carried out a lot of projects, but I would like to introduce the different projects that we developed during the past years, and also some projects that we have started for the first time. Seoul Law 7017, which you saw just before, was a project to use a road that was no longer used. And there was a competition in 2015, and MVRDV of the Netherlands won the competition, and in 3 years it was completed. And as you saw in the video, based on this road, we would like to branch out in 7 directions. And there are many roads in the 65.5% which we haven't been able to use. We want to use this traffic island for new space. And we want to expand the road. And this is a Shinne IC. We would like to cover the road in order to build a new city. And we had a competition in 2019, and it's in the process of being built. And recently, there was a competition based on our research, and we would like to transform a public bus garage into a multi-level complex. And so, as you can see, we would like to transform not only the roads, but small overpasses and small spaces that are underused or not used at all. And we filtered out about 200, and we have 6 spaces on which we would like to do some testing.
We made a prototype and master plan as well as guidelines. As a result, we came up with 6 prototypes. For example, the first is the station at Oksu that will be transformed into new cultural space. In the Imandong area, a new space will be created without much cost. If necessary, a smart library can take place, can be built in Doksan, an urban park in Hannam, and sports facility in Chonga. These are the projects that will be completed this year. The Oksu project was completed in 2018. It has opened and is being used for community activities. The Imun project was completed a while ago, and it is being utilized as a new outdoor space. In the 65%, the waterfront accounts for a large portion. This is the Tancheon near the Chamsil Gymnasium, and the Tancheon River will be transformed. This project was based on a competition that took place last year. The MVRDV of the Netherlands, which was responsible for designing Solo, won the competition. In Hangang, as you probably have seen, there are about 35 bridges. The Hangang is very wide, unlike Thames or the Seine, so it's very difficult to cross the river by foot. We thought about how we can build a new infrastructure here. This bridge is the oldest bridge on the Hangang River, and the project will create a new pedestrian program. The competition is now taking place. The north side of the bridge will be based on this new idea and will be a continuation of that project. This is the Chamsu Bridge, or the underpart of the bridge, where cars and pedestrians and bicyclists are traveling all together right now. It will be transformed into a complete pedestrian-only space. This is a project that's being planned right now. We have rainwater pumps that deal with floods. The rainwater pumps will be transformed into a new community complex. This is a place called Yeonhee, and it has a rainwater pump as well. This station will be made into new space. This is the actual project that will take place, and it was based on a competition in 2019, and the architect is designing a new program titled Low Carbon Life Pump Station. Rainwater pump, which is part of an infrastructure, was planned for 2017 to become a complex for commuters. The title of the project is Living Infrastructure. The final project is about underground. Of the 65% space that was not used, the large part was underground. The MDRV, the Tancheon project, will be linked with this region, which is the Gangnam area. Gangnam is well known by foreigners as well. This is a project for the Gangnam region. The competition took place in 2017, and Dominique Perrault will be undertaking the project. This is a new project utilizing light, and a totally different kind of space will be created as a result. Unlike the large-scale projects, there are small-scale projects as well. This space is a part of the underground subway. It is not utilized right now, but it will be transformed into a media art gallery. In Seoul, there's a large amount of underground space, and right now we're building a master plan that will be connecting these underground spaces. Here you have the city hall, the Dongdaemun DDP will be connected underground in the underground as well. We are planning this, and we are making preparations to execute it. Finally, among these totally new plans, the underground portion is very unique, and we did a pilot project for this underground project because it was never done before. As you can see in this map, the underground facilities, or the subway facilities, are widely distributed throughout Seoul, but they are not actually interconnected. The square in the middle indicates the central business district of Seoul, and we have a pilot project in this space. It's called the Chonga Station project. It's the central district of Seoul, and we are even nowadays excavating artifacts in this part. Sunlight will be brought in to make the underground space a totally different kind of space. In New York, there's a project in the lower line using sunlight, so that was the inspiration here. Instead of making a sunken system, we'll be using a new technology to create a sun portal system. We'll bring in the sunlight from above ground and allow the underground space to be about 85% equal to the above ground space. That'll allow vegetation to be grown in this space. This is the image that we have drawn, and the project opened on December 13th last year. It is currently being used by people. The important thing is that after being completed in December last year, in May this year, I believe we were the first to succeed in having fruits borne by trees, and the trees flower underground. This was the first time we succeeded in doing this. We were the first to make this succeed. And based on this, we are planning to expand these types of projects to better utilize the 65% of the space in Seoul that is not being used. This will transform Seoul. Seoul, or another Seoul, is about finding a new Seoul. As we indicated in the title, we were able to look at many different cities through the Biennale. We were able to make exchanges, and by asking the question yes or yes, we inspire each other, and we are able to help each other.
Thank you. We will now start the roundtable discussion. We have many people who have joined us for the roundtable discussion. First, Kim Seung-hye, the chief architect, will start. Please. I would like to thank all of our speakers for a very interesting presentation. And the topic of the exhibition and city as verb, the theme of the seminar, the symposium are all very interesting. Marina introduced the operation of HNI, and I really felt it was not just city as a verb, but it's the museum as a verb. There's a Russian singer who sings a song that says museums are cemeteries and that frames are the coffin. I mean, that was the lyric of the song. But I think listening to Marina, that Het Nieuwe Instituut is active, is dynamic, and responding to all the different issues. So it was very interesting and inspiring. Responding, moving, and breathing together with the society can happen inside, within the scales of the museum, but can also happen within the scales of the city. As Mr. Kim Tae-yong explained, during the past 10 years, Seoul also has been very dynamic and has changed considerably and plans to change even more in the future. And he explained this in detail with his PowerPoint presentation. And Mr. Kim Zukyung also talked about Seoul as a city which moves and is dynamic. But in what direction should Seoul go was his question. Because it's not just necessary to be moving, we have to know where we are moving to, in what direction we are going. So through the three presentations, we were able to look at how a small institution, which is a museum, can work on the different societal issues and how within the city we can respond to the social issues. I have a question for Professor John Hong, actually. The exhibition will close today. The symposium will also end today. When you planned City as Verb and when you planned City as Verb, the exhibition and the seminar, as the person responsible for the planning of the event, could you reflect and give some comments on how you feel about it?
Question thrown at me through these, so I'm not prepared. I don't know what this whole thing is about. Actually, it's gone so far beyond what I expected, actually, and the reason why the idea of verb was put into the mix here was because we always think of our city as fixed. That we think of it as nouns, we think of it as infrastructure that can't be moved, or housing that is fixed, or even social situations. I think going back to Marina's lecture as well, social situations can also be thought of as fixed and regressive for that reason. So as long as we start thinking of it as a verb, we can actually bring in citizen engagement. So that was the whole purpose of this thing. If we could think of, instead of road or street, we think of moving. Moving is much more about being able to take individual action. There's many ways to move and improvise and creatively experience the city. So the idea of the verb actually has been a way to just engage everyone, all the speakers, but also the citizens as well. And I think the topic has been expanded so greatly, and I have to thank all the speakers. And so yes, that's my answer.
네.
All right. There were so many things that were discussed, so I don't know where I should focus on. Should I talk about the urban or architectural missions for us? There were topics surrounding exhibitions, and this space that we are in right now has been built a few years ago, but we can think about its role and its function as well. The Seoul Hall of Urbanism and Architecture. And we can also talk about the purpose of the projects that the Seoul city government is pursuing next year. Although we don't know how the COVID-19 situation will unfold, we are anticipating the third Seoul Biennale of Urbanism and Architecture. There are several things that we can focus on, but all of the things that were mentioned gives us a sense of mission of what we should do as people trying to improve the urban space in Seoul. As I listened to the many presentations, after I retired from being the chief architect, I went back to my office. And then I realized that I really had to focus on what I had to do as an architect working out of his office. As I mentioned earlier, what I had to think about was my attitude of how I would respond to the challenges of Seoul. The new role of designers, the new role of institution aptly describe this, because what I should do, what I have to do, is not much different from what I did in the bureau. What I did as an individual architect is not much different from what I did in the bureau, then I have to rethink a few things. If I look back at the past few years, I was very, very busy. And now, what is the shape of Seoul in 2020? It's not a simple question. But we can start with the nature. We have many mountains in Seoul. We have a wide river in Seoul. Seoul is in the midst of this grand nature. At the same time, we have the product of fast development in a large scale. Then there are small scale developments, and the people and the space where people have been living in for many years. So all of these things are mixed in Seoul. Compared to other cities, of course they have these different elements, but it's not so much intertwined as it is in Seoul. This is a challenge that we need to address as architects. And what role should we play as architects? I think that is the key issue. I think there are two main things that we need to do. In the process of development, we often say that while we were busy developing and growing, we built these systems and institutions. So we're trying to change things in architecture, but basically our system was based on speed, efficiency, and low cost. We're used to that. That's the system that we have embedded in our society. And it has been a useful tool for us, but it really doesn't work that well anymore. I think that's one of the reasons why we created the Bureau for Space Improvement. In the past, we would make one thing and then reproduce it again and again and again. If you look at bridges and other infrastructure, as well as structures or apartment buildings, we would create one model and then reproduce it again and again repetitively. This doesn't work anymore. Now we have to make individual things differently and make them unique. That requires time, money, and that has to be supported by the system. That is a large challenge and task that we face. We are making attempts, but it requires further effort. This is something that I can't do as an architectural firm. And that's why we have to come together and talk about it together in this public space. There are some things that need to be done at the system level, but there are other things that need to be done. We have to create individual projects. But as I said earlier, we start with nature, that goes through fast development, and then we have fragments. We have the result of development that are all fragmented throughout the city. What should we do? We can simply do a project and place it wherever, but when it comes to a larger project that needs to include the whole city, it's a different matter. The role of designer is what was mentioned, but I think we should think about the new role of designer and the new challenge. If we're going to interconnect elements, I don't think we're talking about connecting the different projects in a linear pattern. For example, the Solo project was planned from the beginning, and we thought about having long, narrow projects, forming layers, and connecting the three characters that were separated until now. Either we would make the boundaries blurred or make the connections stronger. The Solo project is more of a civil engineering project because it was a matter of structure. So it was based on the assumption that we would leave the structure intact. Then it became a landscape project because it was all about planting trees on top of that structure, similar to the Gwangjin project. Who would be doing that? The landscape architect has had their own techniques, methodologies. Civil engineers had their own way of doing things. The city had their own way of doing things. The interior artists and architects all had different way of working. So when we're saying new challenge, we're talking about a new attitude towards public projects. We have to start by forgetting where we come from. For example, we talked about the alley architects. When the alley architect establishes himself as an architect, he'll do more harm than good. Because his role may not be to construct, but to demolish. Who's responsible for demolitions? We didn't have that role before. It's the same for planting trees. The new challenge is about breaking boundaries between different disciplines and creating a new methodology. We have to keep asking these questions right now. As I run my own agricultural firm, I don't think I'll have another opportunity to create that kind of project for the city. But this type of project is what we actually need. And NIA or HNA, I think the name changed, but anyhow, this exhibition is taking place to discover these challenges and share different ways of solving this, discussing this, and coming up with new ideas. It's a task for us, but Actually, in other countries, there are cities that went before us. They might have tackled it in a different way, but I think they were given the same task. Anyhow, it's all about coexisting environmental facilities. It's beyond architecture. It's not landscape per se, but it has elements of all of these different disciplines. We have to completely change our conventional way of thinking. For architects, there are architects specializing in materials, some specializing in structures, but we're all working within a given lot. A project in a lot can be done by individual architects, but we're talking about something larger here. It requires a systemic change. Of course, the system will not change unless it is challenged and given a task. We have to find projects, discover new projects. The Biennale of Architecture and Urbanism can be a basis for taking on these tasks. There are so many different kind of things that can be done. But the key is about finding the way to respond to these new challenges.
Paco Bunik, are you online with us right now?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes. Paco Bunik is the Chief Urban Designer for the Department of Planning and Sustainability in Amsterdam. We're so privileged you can join us a third time now. I'm wondering if you could make a comment on something that was said today.
Thank you. First, I'd like to thank the City of Seoul for being so invited. For such an international company, it's been heartwarming. I was curator for the Seoul Biennale in 2019. It was a fantastic experience for me, the third time in this city, and learning more every time I go there. So I hope to come back next year. I want to thank Marina for the beautiful presentation. Images, drawings. I was mesmerized by the hand drawings and the octopus drawing with the cube, that escaping the boundaries of the museum. And it says a lot, I think, because I think it's very true. And I think culture and museum is not a luxury good. Museum should be part of a civic and a cultural process. And that's what she really mentioned and shows, I think. And when you go back to urban planning, first presentation, what I really liked, I think, was Zukyung Kim. He talked about this need of intermediate urban spaces. And I totally agree with that. And we do that same in Amsterdam. So the need to tackle this intermediate level of urban design and where all boundaries interfere, landscape architecture, social design architecture, that's what really matters in the cities right now, I think. And then I made some notes when I heard the last lecture on the history of Seoul. And I thought it's interesting. So you could say that's like an ABC. First there's attention to growth and efficiency. And then maybe now we're in an age where there's more attention to public space and climate resiliency, how to tackle it. But now where we're going to, I think, is that there's more attention to the value of social structures and new forms of productivity within the city, but also outside of the city. And that's also mentioned in the lecture of Marina very clearly, I think. So I think that's to step a little bit faster ahead to see to the attention of the value of social structures, I think, key for successful cities. So I think that's my final remark.
Well, great, thank you. Actually, you're much better than we are in summing this up. There are so many great topics, but thank you.
네, 이어서 윤승현 교수님께서 말씀 이어주세요.
Professor Yoon-Sung-hyun. Yes, good afternoon. My name is Yoon-Sung-hyun. I was part of the 2045 urban space project. We are researching together. It's a difficult project and we're still a little bit confused. So in this respect, I heard many things that were useful and helpful. With regard to the museum presentation, it started with a question of what a museum is and what a museum can be. And you made many new attempts, which was fascinating for us. We should start with the question of what Seoul is and what Seoul can be, and how we should tackle this. That was a question that we would like to ask through a 2045 project. Until now, there were many innovative attempts made in Seoul, but these new initiatives can be more valuable and open a new way the city works. If we want to find out whether this is being done, we have to look at how the residents of the city are living and using those spaces, the physical spaces. We have to identify how the citizens use those spaces, and the result of this question has to be integrated into our project. I'm also curious to find out how this is being done in other cities. Until now, there might have been innovative and curious projects, interesting projects that were implemented. I think we can compare this to a singer on stage. We have the orchestra that allows the singer to shine. I'm talking metaphorically. The singer has to have talent, but then there's the orchestra that supports that singer. Who should be playing the role of orchestra in the city of Seoul? It's an entity providing rhythm and providing the necessary background for the singer. What can we do if we are to play the role of the orchestra? I think that's an important question that we must ask. We might have musicians in the city of Seoul, but then there could be a dancer who dances along that song. Who or what can be that dancer? This is closely related to the everyday lives of the citizens. I think this provides us with an opportunity to ask the questions of who should play the role of the dancer to make the singer shine even further on stage. I would like to know what you have in Amsterdam. What is the mechanism that provides the rhythm or the dance in Amsterdam?
I think that might be a great question for Paco Bunnik to answer. Yes.
I'm a really bad dancer. I'm sorry. No, this.
Tell us how it's done. We're looking towards you.
This is difficult. I think it's a matter of attitude and culture, as mentioned before by the previous city architect. So the attitude which provides freedom or free space for citizens and being adaptive, that creates this crazy dance which we're in, and which may come to result in a better city, I think. So for me, it's about the way you work, the way we work together on multiple levels. That creates good choreography. And it's not only done by the city or the top-down system, not at all. I think it's done by the openness and the invitiveness of the people who work for the city and who have heart for the people of the city.
That's a beautiful answer, actually. We're just. Marina, could you also fill us in, because actually Paco's version of this story is about open communication, and it sounds a little bit utopic, and your title had the word conflict in it. I mean, is there a balance between people coming together and agreeing on things, or the idea of conflict? I'm wondering if you can add on to this idea of this dance that we're talking about, how things happen.
Yeah, I guess when we think about cities, many times we have made the mistake, architects, to treat them as a very, like as a body that can be easily domesticated and design from above. We are learning that more and more that that's not possible, that indeed there are live beings and they have, as the octopus again, many forms of intelligence in all of its parts. And they are dynamic and they are moving. And so these notions of urban development that in my generation also I studied, might not be adequate to design the city of the future. In relation to conflictual situations, not only in the way we coexist, I have a few ideas. Perhaps one is that architecture and urban planning has, most of the times, we focus around the notion of the human. So having a human-centric position in how we design, and is primarily based on the comfort of the human and the privilege of the human in relation to other species. And we are learning now that that's not possible to continue anymore, to have that attitude, that the city has to be a form of coexistence where different comforts come together, and that creates conflict. So how we can design cities where plants be other beings like animals and air quality, many different actors come together, and that means that perhaps we have to redefine notions of human comfort in order to allow a more sustainable approach that creates a better planet. That's one thing. The other is that there are many forms of exclusion that come together with the design of architecture. And obviously now we are trying to amend in many ways these forms of inequality and exclusion that different forms of urban planning and architecture have brought over decades and centuries. And that means that certain areas or certain citizens had more privileges, and now they have to perhaps let some of this go in favor of opening it up for other voices, other type of forms of living, and so on. That also creates certain conflicts, but isn't somehow inevitable. I think that the best design is one that is, perhaps decentering the human from it, and at the same time being extremely generous to every single being that is in the city. And those parameters are not necessarily present in the way we still study or practice architecture. So the discipline needs a complete redefinition to be able to design the cities that we need right now. And finally, I will come to technology. That is such an important part of the ways in which we would think and inhabit cities in the future. And yet, architects sometimes are very behind the development of these new technologies. And we always come when these technologies are almost, ready to be implemented, or they are implemented, and then we have to think how to coexist with those developments. I will invite also architects and urbanists to try to position themselves in the spaces of decision-making and development of these technologies that ultimately have a big impact in how cities are thought and inhabited, lived. And more importantly, also to be a voice in which the fact that there is a technology available doesn't mean that is one that should be embraced. So I think we have to have a lot of conversations in which certain innovations might bring too much conflict. I'm always in favor of, a conflict that's inevitable, but we have to also be aware of how certain technologies actually are extremely disruptive and not necessarily are creating a better city.
Great. Well, thank you for that answer. Yes.
네, 감사합니다. 다음은 지금 도시 설계 분야에서 활동을 활발하게 하고 계시는 유석연.
I would like to invite Professor Zukyung, who is very active in urban planning, to give her comments. Hello, everyone. We listened to very different presentations today, and I learned a lot from all of the presentations today. It was very helpful. And with the first speaker, I started to draw Seoul in 2014, and we started our research together then. And the other discussants already mentioned the project. And HNI, I visited 2 years ago, and I went to all the exhibitions. They have a great library, great bookstore, great cafe. So I spent a lot of time there. I have very fond memories of that place. And at the Venice Biennale, I also went inside that orange room that we saw on the slides. And what I felt when I walked into that orange room was, it was an orange locker. It was the same color, but when we opened the locker, the size was different, and sometimes it was a window, sometimes it was another type of space. So it was a very diverse type of space. So I thought, wow, they're really trying to show off what they have. That's what I felt. And so you did a lot of research on all of the issues, and you tried to compress many different topics with a certain attitude, and I envied you that. And usually when we curate an exhibition, we try to create a form, a shape, but instead of doing that, you try to identify all of the important issues, and you wanted all the artists and architects to dialogue with the people when they opened the locker. And I really envied that approach, and I had a lot of fun visiting the pavilion. The orange was really strong. It was a very strong orange color. And it's also something that we can see very often in our everyday life when we move around. There were also public baths. In any case, it was very impressive and shocking for me to see that kind of a locker space in that pavilion. I focused on two things in Marina's presentation. You talked about reading. Reading as an active form of engagement was what you said. If we don't read correctly, then we cannot identify the problems. And we have to set up a vision in order to create change and in order to start our work. So I think reading is the most difficult to do, and we have to carry out many discussions before reading. That's why you mentioned idea and conflict in your presentation. And what is the function of the exhibition was the other question that you asked. I am an architect, but I've been working on urban planning for more than 12 years. So I meet many citizens, I fight with them. I would never have been able to meet them if I had worked just as an architect, but I try to play a mediating role with citizens. And you try to communicate with the people through exhibitions, and I thought that is what Korea needs to do too. And you showed us the different graphs about gender, about who your fellows were, how old they were, from which country they came. I think we use that kind of tool to analyze the city, and the information can teach us a lot. And you showed us the graph with many works of art and architecture, and I was impressed by that. And you saw the video of Seoul 7017, and we talked about connecting the 7 streets with the Seoul, and we are working with 7 alley architects, and I participated in that project. So it feels like we are, boasting and showing off about what we did. So I'm a bit embarrassed, but we would like to show through the video what we have done to the citizens of Seoul and to the public officials of Seoul, to show them that we have done something. So maybe this video, it was not right for this symposium. But anyway, like you said, we carried out a lot of collection of information on the sites, and we did the reading for a year. We met with everyone in the community. We did a lot of reading. And unfortunately, the video doesn't really show the amount of work that went into it. And we wanted to do that project as a part of a regeneration project of Seoul. We wanted overpasses to become a pedestrian road for the citizens. That is one type of regeneration. But more important than that, we have different neighborhoods where we have many people who are living in those neighborhoods that have become dilapidated, and we want to revive them. So at the center is a social issue. Mr. Kim Young-jun said that we have to empty ourselves. We can't do that. We cannot empty the neighborhood. It will take time. And the citizens would like to create something, and they are asking for things to get better. We are unable to go up to that level. But these different stories can become part of the story of Seoul, and maybe it can revive a city that is about to die. It can be a starting point. Architects really participated in this project as the first project that was truly focused on regeneration. And one more thing I'd like to add is we have reached our peak in terms of population. 25 years from now, the population will fall, and in 2 years, the number of students will also decrease. We are facing a population cliff, and I am planning a new city where 80,000 people can live. But yesterday, there was a government announcement that said that they were going to build more houses, more housing. So we have to regenerate and revive dying cities. But in 25 years, we think that our demography will change and our population will decrease. But then we are saying that we are going to supply the city with more housing. It's a political move, and people are thinking about the economic benefits of that, and people are talking about basic housing rights, and that's why we need to provide more supply of housing. And so different values are fighting with each other in Korea right now. It's proof that we are very dynamic and we are changing. But it's also proof that architects and landscape architects, we're not just people who are creating spaces. We have to think about all of this too. I'd like to meet you one day. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. You make us think about many things. Finally, I'd like to invite the ambassador from the Netherlands to make some final remarks.
Kamsahamnida. Thank you so much. This is a little bit unexpected. I must say that I have been listening here, wow, to all these stories. I mean, I've been here right now for a year. I'm here on my bike. I'm coming down, going to the office, I walk. So to hear the plans, to connect, I think that's a very important thing, being a citizen here, and to listen to your citizens, how they use it. And indeed, the underground passages, I mean, I found out, wow, there's another world below Seoul. So a lot of things are here coming together in these presentations. And I must say I'm proud to hear Marina talk about the Nieuwe Instituut and the kind of research we do. Originally, I'm a landscape architect, so I was involved. I worked for the city of Amsterdam a long time ago. And it's great to hear these kind of stories here and what's happening here. And I think one of the lessons right now, I mean, you never are ready with your city. It's not dying, it's alive with all the citizens that are there. And right now we see with COVID-19, what's happening also in the Netherlands, we realize how important your direct surroundings are for the people who could not go, they did not dare to take their public transport, but they wanted just to recreate, to get some fresh air. So how important is your public space around the place where you're living, and how can you connect that? And also right now, climate change. Right now here you have the floodings. And that in the future that will be more, that will increase. It will not just be right now. I mean, so what is the city going to do to capture that water? So right now in the Netherlands we have a lot of experience. Okay, how can we retain that water and then use that space in another sense as well to prevent floodings, but you still can continue with your life. And having the green roofs, I mean, there's a lot of development. Every time I return to the Netherlands, I'm been away right now for a few years, it's very dynamic, and I see the same here. So it's very nice, and thank you so much for having me. And please continue your cooperation with the Netherlands. I think there's a lot that we can learn from each other. Thank you. Kamsahamnida.
Well, we're wrapping up now. And it's been a longish evening. I wish we had more time, but this is the format. This kind of conversation, this kind of meeting actually deserves more time and more conversation. So in that regard, these series, Marina, just like your exhibitions, could we put Marina on the screen too, and also Paco? Could we have all of us on the screen? The purpose of these is to start conversations. They're not really to be final words on anything. So I think we were successful in doing that, and we're going to have many more of these conversations. And just like Marina, the work that you're doing, you're now the exhibit is working towards things that are unfinished. You know, they're in process. So that's exactly what this evening was about. But one thing I just wanted to close with in terms of the idea of city as a verb, and if I was trying to summarize, I think there is a thread that begins to put these conversations in a kind of an important relationship to each other. And the first thing is that Marina, you're such a eloquent speaker and so nice, but I think you are a wolf in sheep's clothing. Do you know that terminology, a wolf in sheep's clothing? And I think that's great. That's exactly what the role of a curator in an institution like yourself should be, in that you have to connect to the public, but you also have to create conflict. And so in a way you have to make things palatable, but also make them readable. And so that way, the idea of the wolf in sheep clothing is a very important member of society. You know, you're not creating tension for tension's sake. You're actually going in there strategically. So I think that's very important. And I think we need that because as I was looking through all the incredible projects that the city of Seoul is doing, I was also thinking about an article that I just read yesterday about the OECD countries, you know, the most quote-unquote advanced countries. And the first thing that I saw was the United States is at the bottom of the list. The quality of life is awful in the US because of inequality, all the racial injustice, but also because of health and infrastructure. You know, these are the main categories of the OECD ranking. But so that I was having a kind of a bittersweet laugh about that the US has plummeted. But low on the list in the bottom third was Korea. In terms of the OECD quality of life. Korea was, so the projects that we saw today, they're very optimistic, but they're not innocent projects. They're being done for a reason. They're being done because there is a crisis level of things happening in Korea, and so they're done in response to crisis. And I think that's one thing that we can't forget in terms of the idea of City of Verb, that these are not just kind of projects that are just icing on the cake, that they're making a good place better. They're actually in response to crisis. And I think, so the role that you brought, Marina, to the table here is that we need to be able to identify those modes of crisis, and we need to understand that these are not just projects that will make the city nicer. They're actually projects that will actually hopefully solve inequality, environmental issues, and also the idea that technology is not innocent as well. Technology can be problematic. So that's the way I would sum this up, a great kind of beginning discussion between all of us. So in that regard, I want to say thank you. Thank you to all the listeners from all over the world. We've had guests from Africa, really great comments from all over the world, from the Middle East. And so it's been a really privilege running this, and today's the last day. But again, it's the last day is the first day. It's the beginning of a lot of conversations. So thank you again, Marina. Thank you again, Paco, for joining us from abroad. And thank you everyone at this table. Good night.